Welcome, welcome, welcome to the fifth episode of Find Your Free, the podcast. I am your hostess, Rachel Voss, and this is officially the first podcast of 2021. So, of course, I want to start off by saying Happy New Year. Even though we're just 3 days in as I'm recording this, I do hope already that your new year is off to a great start, that you have put the foot forward that you wanted to start with, and that it's already feeling like it's going to be a year filled with ease, right? 2020 certainly felt like anything but as of now, 2020 is in the past, and here we are. So again, welcome and Happy New Year. So, in the last podcast, I ended by saying that I hoped I would be able to get my love, David, on the mic with me today. I really have this vision of us doing multiple episodes together, but taking this sort of interviewing each other format, asking each other kind of like random questions, and really just giving the world some insight into what is our world. But my love is a Capricorn. And if anybody knows, or loves a Capricorn, you know that they are about perfection, even if they try to act like they're not. And he wants to have the right setup so that we can come across clearly and, just really be able to get into the space. So we are going to work on that setup in the meantime. And for now, you'll have just me. But being that I was going to have my mate on with me today, I kept feeling like, I want to talk about something with relationships, right? But what do I talk about? And so I kept kind of waiting for the ideas to come, for the thought that would spark the episode to come. But outside of knowing that I just wanted to talk about relationships, I was like, I'm coming up with nothing. And then all of a sudden I started hearing the song Love the One You're With going through my head, right? If you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And I started thinking about that. And then I was like, you know what? I know what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about loving the one you're with, who is you, loving yourself, and how do you show up in your relationships. And I thought that might be a good place to start, before I have David come on the mic and we talk about a couple things. Like, let's start at the beginning. It starts with us, right? So I don't have my notes. Usually I have some notes. And usually I kind of have things crafted like, make sure you talk about this or, whatever. And I don't have that. I just really was like, I'm going to go with this energy of love the one you're with and see where it takes me. But I guess we'll get into kind of my growth, my experience with relationships. And this is love relationships, right? Boyfriend, girlfriend relationships, mate relationships. So this is the context of this podcast today. But certainly if anything applies or stands out that can be used or applied in other areas of your life outside of, intimate, loving relationships, take the knowledge and apply it as needed. So, I don't know. I feel like I should start in my 20s, and no, this is not going to be some long drawn out experience of every relationship, but just more about learning about myself and relationships. So I think it was the second episode where I talked about my fertility journey at the age of 43. And in that episode, I shared how I've had this lifelong desire to have kids, to have, the nuclear family, my husband, my 4 kids, to be specific, okay, to be specific. When I was a teenager, right up until I started college, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. I grew up in New Jersey, right outside of New York City. So I wanted to be a hot shot lawyer. I wanted to have a penthouse in Manhattan. I wanted to have 4 kids, be married, have all of this before, if not by time I was 30. So we're talking my JD, we're talking building a successful legal career, we're talking about building it enough to be able to afford a penthouse in Manhattan and a penthouse with a partner and 4 kids. And that dream never hung on my partner making a lot of money. It was just no, I'm going to be able to do all of this. So I was going to do all of this by the time I was 30. And the minute that I stepped onto Temple's campus, shout out to Temple University, the minute I stepped onto Temple's campus and, started taking classes, I started off as, did I start off as pre-law? I feel like they didn't have pre-law as a major at the time. So I might have just went straight on in with criminal justice, right? But I went in, and the minute I took the first couple of classes, I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do law school. I definitely like this criminal justice realm, these studies, learning about society and, things like that. But I knew straight away that I didn't want to be a lawyer. So being a lawyer by 30 immediately dashed within like my first semester of starting college. But I still always had the vision of having this family, right? And even though being a lawyer by 30 was off the table, being married by 30 was still very much a viable, option, especially at like 18, 19. You think, oh, I got so much time ahead of me. I will have it all accomplished by time I'm 30, including figuring out my career since I don't want to be a lawyer now. So I wasn't one who went to college to find my husband. I went to college because I come from a family of that is what you do. You go to college, you get your higher education, you get your career, you go out into the world and do your thing. And so I went to college to fulfill that. I went to college because I wanted to go to college, and I am blessed to have gone to the college that I really wanted to go to. Quick sidebar, I had like, was it 6 schools I applied to? I think 5 accepted me. And it was a toss-up between 3. Interestingly enough, the University of Maryland College Park was the first school that accepted me, and I was interested in it, but decided to turn it down. Once I visit that school, another HBCU, which will remain nameless because I don't want anybody coming at me like, why didn't you pick us? And then Temple. So Temple was the last of those 3 that I had visited within like a week span or something. And when I hadn't even gotten onto Temple's campus. So if anybody went to Temple or lives in Philly or near Temple or whatever, like, when you come off the Ben Franklin Bridge, right, and you come down the road that's escaping me right now, but it's the road that you take. Is it Vine Street? I can't remember. But anyway, it's the road that you take when you get off the Ben Franklin Bridge that you take that will ultimately lead you to making that right onto Broad Street. And so when I made that right onto Broad Street, coming off the Ben Franklin Bridge, like the minute we made the right, Broad Street goes way down, way, way down. But I see the T's, like these T flags flying in the wind off of the lampposts, the street lights. And as soon as I saw those T's, I was like, oh yeah, this is it. And then we pulled up to the campus, and I had the very good fortune of pulling up. If it wasn't a spring fling day, it was a spring fling-ish type of day. Like everybody was on the yard, and it was just like, again, if you went to Temple or if you hung out on Temple's campus, like Temple on a good spring day was definitely on and popping. And so I pulled up on one of those days, and I was just like, yeah, this is it. So that was really like my first, I always look back on that in my life because I was 17. I started college at 17 and then turned 18 a month later. But I always look back on my life and look at that moment as the first moment where I felt, like really felt and trusted my instinct. If I felt it as a child, I'm not aware. It's not like in my consciousness, but I can consciously remember that moment of listening to my intuition. Like my mom loved College Park. She loved that campus. My brother loved the HBCU that I won't mention, but I was like, nah, this is it. I'm going here. And I'm so glad because I firmly believe if I had gone to those other schools, I probably would have ended up transferring out. So yeah, shout out to Temple. But anyway, so being at Temple, I didn't go there to, find a husband. Certainly, like I met guys and had relationships and had a good time. But it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to college to find a husband. It wasn't that mentality. It was just like, life is just going to bring me this because this is what I want, right? So this is before I understand anything about manifesting and vision boards and getting clear and all of that. Like I am straight up, at this point, just going to church, every once in a while, saying my prayers and trying to be as much of a good girl as I possibly can, and feeling guilty, right, when I'm not. But I just kind of felt like, no, it's just like, that's what happens. Like you grow up, you get married, you have kids, like that's it. And interestingly enough, I met my now ex-husband / son's father the last semester of Temple. We were both, I'd never met him before. Ultimately would find out we just ran in totally different social circles. I lived on campus. He was a commuter. So it was just it was a whole different vibe. And, but we met because we were both invited to attend this conference on like higher education and pursuing like graduate school beyond Temple. Like we were selected to attend this conference, and our tables were kind of near each other. And there was I think there was like a mutual friend or somebody there, but somehow, some way we ended up having conversation, found out we did have one or two, mutual friends, and struck up a conversation and went from there. And ultimately I did, I guess, meet my husband at college. And so we didn't get married right away. I'm going to save the story of that whole situation for an episode in and of itself. So I'm not going to get into too many of the details here. I feel in my heart like I truly want to share some insight and experience from my marriage and that time of my life, because it was a difficult time. But I feel like that should be an episode in and of itself. And that is certainly an episode I have to take a lot of time to think about in terms of approach and what I would say, and, what I'm comfortable with saying, like what could my son ultimately hear, like, all of that stuff. So without getting into all of that detail, I did meet him just before graduating college, but we ultimately did not get married until, 7-8 years later, something like that. So after graduating from college, I, worked for a year in New York, went back home, had a boyfriend during that time, and then ended up moving out to DC. So I was only home after college for a year before making the transition from New Jersey to DC for grad school. And moving to DC, like not knowing anybody, I didn't really have I had no kind of network, actually, no community, no nothing. So it was definitely like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to meet anybody out here. It was really just kind of figuring out my life. But eventually I found my way. You start to get adjusted. You learn, where you need to go, where you need to drive, how you need to get there. And, I moved to DC before, like, I was still on a Nokia. So like iPhones weren't a thing. Maybe GPS systems were just coming out, but it wasn't like a big thing. So MapQuest, I think, was around at that point, or at least some type of direction service. So we're just using like whatever direction service to figure out, DC. And DC is notorious, or at least it was at the time, for like closed roads. And this is only a one way. And of course, like MapQuest or whatever I use, like picked up all of the roads that I couldn't take. So figuring out how to get around DC, that first year was definitely interesting. But eventually I found my way, and I began to build a community at the graduate school I was attending. Shout out to the American University. Ultimately, I landed a full-time job on campus, so I was really immersed in my community. I worked there from 9 to 5 and then did class from like 5 to 8, 8 to 10. And eventually I started building my life in DC, and I, probably about a year after being here, my best college friend, shout out to you, Joy, came down and we went out. So it took me a year before I finally went to the infamous DC Live. So Joy and I go to DC Live together, and it was there at the ripe age of like 22 that I met the person who was like my first significant relationship down here in DC. And I was Christian at the time. He is Muslim. And, in those first couple of months of like meeting and hanging out, like all that stuff doesn't matter. But eventually, because I had this, like, I have to get married, I want to have kids and all this stuff, eventually, like, once the sort of honeymoon period or the newness, of just meeting somebody, especially in your 20s, once that wore off, and I can say all of this in hindsight, my mind like automatically goes into the mode of like, all right, where's this going? What's it going to be? What's all of this? And I started getting myself concerned about the whole Christian Muslim difference. And even though I was not firmly rooted in my Christian upbringing, I had been baptized and stuff like that, but I just wasn't like super rooted. I felt like I wanted to try and convert him, so we could both be Christian and have this life that I was dreaming of, and went on this like pursuit to do that. And ultimately, I ended up converting to Islam. Another episode, another conversation for another episode. But I ended up converting to Islam right after September 11th. Not right after, about 2 years after September 11th, but to be a Black American woman, growing up in a Christian family, to decide to have become Muslim like after September 11th, with all the stigmatism and stereotype about even being Muslim out there, it was definitely like, what are you doing? We don't understand this. But it was something that spoke to me, and it's a path that I'm very, very, very grateful for. I was a practicing Muslim for about 3 years, and it really, really healed me in a lot of ways. And again, saving that for another episode. But ultimately, I converted to be a Muslim, and that was about 2 or 3 years into my relationship with this guy. And so it was just like, okay, I'm Muslim, let's get married. And it was just like, he is not a Black American Muslim. He is, I did this noise that David's going to be like, Rachel, don't make that noise. And then he's probably going to edit this out anyway. But he's from Africa. So he's a Muslim from an African country. So in his culture, it was like, you don't date the way that we date. So it wasn't like, hey, mom, this is Bob. We've been dating for a while. We have intentions to be together. And Bob comes to like, the family dinners and functions and all that good stuff, right? No. And the culture he grew up in his culture, it was like, you don't introduce a woman to the family unless you are specifically intending to marry that woman. So there's not like really a courting period, if you would. It's like, this is my intention. And so because that was in direct conflict with how I grew up, right? So I am the only girl of all brothers. And I grew up, frankly, with this understanding that the women that my brothers brought home, the women that met my mom, were important women. The women who didn't were not, and it doesn't mean that they weren't important women in their own right, but in terms of who they were to my brother, like the ones who met my mom were few and far between. So that just told me something, right? And what that did is it created a narrative, a story, an expectation in my head that I have to be somebody that the man introduces to his mom. And my mom, being an old school Southern woman, and all her just ways of raising me, like that narrative was also there. Like, yeah, like you don't come through anybody's back door. You are a front door daughter, and if you have a parent from the South or like just an old school parent, you'll understand that backdoor talk. So when, I'm kind of itching like, oh, we should be getting married and we should be getting engaged and all of this stuff, like I was really conflicted with the fact that I wasn't meeting his family. And, we're like 25, 26, maybe like 27 at the time. But what's happening is 30 is starting to be a lot closer than, of course, when I was like 18, 19, and I had the lofty goal of being married by 30. Like now it's like we're getting closer, and I don't feel like I'm anywhere near accomplishing this goal of like being married and having kids. And then even though it wasn't like a plethora of my friends were getting married at the time, you were starting to see, friends getting married. You were starting to see people having babies. Like you were starting to see that shift from like the younger 20s to like now moving into late 20s, early 30s, and getting into that phase of life where we're creating now, the family nucleus. So ultimately, that relationship ended. It was a good 4, maybe 5 years altogether. And it ended, now that I think about it, probably not so amicably, but it wasn't like a horrible thing. When I look back on it, and that's kind of like the whole purpose of this episode, like I really didn't know who I was. Like I knew who I thought I was, but even that shift from Christianity to Islam was like a big, I guess, awakening or moment of, yeah, I am rebuilding the foundation that I was, that I came up into this world with. So like my mom raised me to go into church, and then I made this choice on my own to convert to Islam, right? And I looked at it like, because it felt right. Like he didn't, my mate at the time didn't pressure me at all about becoming Muslim. And in fact, he didn't even know I converted. Like I converted like on my own, and then called him up on some like, hey, assalamu alaikum. And he's like, what? So it was totally a decision that I made on my own, but I didn't realize at the time that it was part of a bigger thing of moving towards living my most authentic life. So again, like I went to college because I wanted to go to college. I have no regrets over that. But it was also part of this template of the people in my family, especially the women in my family. Like you go to high school, you go to college, you maybe go to grad school, and, you start your life and you do your thing and you get married and you have kids. So that was my first moment of sort of breaking out of that, but I didn't realize that. So I didn't automatically hook converting to Islam to being married. But I felt like, okay, we don't have this religious difference anymore. Like, why can't I meet your parents? And ultimately, a relationship on that foundation is going to burn out. And that's what it did. So ultimately, that relationship burned out. And then I'm just kind of hanging out for a while. And then that was the space where my son's dad came back into my life. Even though we didn't date for much longer after we met at Temple, there was a period of time where he went his way and I went mine. But ultimately, he is the reason that I moved to DC. Like when we met at that senior year of college, because again, I had decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my criminal justice degree. I had fostered the idea that I wanted to be of community service. Like I knew there was something in my heart that was like, I want to do something with community. And the criminal justice degree, my studies did play into that, but I just wasn't sure because it wasn't like I knew I wanted to be a social worker. I knew all the things I didn't want to do. I just wasn't clear of what I wanted to do. And so when I met, my son's dad at that time, he knew the path he wanted to pursue. And part of that path was going to Howard for graduate school. And because I just at the time was like, well, I just want to hang out with you. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Hey, I'll go to grad school too. And I literally pulled out, like, I don't even know where I found this book, but I found a book of like grad schools or just some information about grad schools in DC. And I'm just kind of looking, and I will never forget when I got to like the description about American. It said, for people who want to change the world, American is the place to be. And I was like, well, shit, I want to do that. I definitely know I want to change. I don't know anything else, but I know I want to change the world. Like I knew that in my heart. So I was like, all right, I'll apply to grad school. I'll go have this relationship and my life will begin. I didn't plan on us breaking up in that space and all of that good stuff. So ultimately, we did both come to DC. He actually ended up coming a little bit before I did. He started his graduate school semester before I did. When I moved to DC, he actually didn't know that I was here. But ultimately, in time, like, we connected and we actually just had a friendship. We had a friendship for a long time. So while I'm dating a Muslim guy, like, he was my friend. But once the Muslim guy and I broke up, and after some time, my son's husband comes back into my life, and I'll go ahead and just share it. But again, without getting into too much detail, we didn't even really date. We just knew each other because we had been friends. I, would talk to him about relationship stuff. He would talk to me about his life. Like he had some kids, he had 3 kids at the time, but his oldest son was staying with him. And so I would spend time with like his oldest son. So it was just like, we were like part of each other's lives. So, but we weren't like formally dating. But he pops up and asks me to marry him. And I was 28 at the time, 28, getting ready to go in that 29 space. And even though we weren't dating, like really like dating, kind of like courting, as my mom would say. And even though I really liked him, I loved him as this person in my life, but I knew that, again, just being honest, and I'm okay with my son hearing this, I didn't love him in the way that like I love the Muslim guy. Like I guess it's that whole love versus in love thing, right? We're just going to use that. I know some people don't subscribe to that, but we're just going to use that for, general discussion. So I knew that it was different with him, but there was also this closeness and friendship that we had that I didn't have in other relationships. Like I had, good rapport and stuff like that, but there was just this certain kind of friendship. And again, just looking back in hindsight, I realized I probably should have focused on fostering a friendship, maybe not necessarily with the Muslim guy, but in my relationships, as opposed to just jumping into like, oh, well, okay, it's different. I don't feel kind of like the thing that I feel in these other relationships, but this is comfortable, it's safe, like, and he's asking me to marry him. This must be the moment. Now, I had pictured, again, getting married my whole life. And so I pictured moments and all of this stuff. And the proposal came with the ring, but it wasn't the moment that I had always envisioned because, again, we weren't dating. It wasn't like this big thing. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to, my family's like so excited. Like there was no permission asking. There was like none of it. But I just felt like, okay, I said I wanted to be married by the time I'm 30. I'm 28, going on 29. I know this guy, and here he is proposing to me. So you know what I did? I accepted the proposal. And again, I've given even more details now because I want to save it all for that podcast, that episode. So I accepted the proposal, and 6 months later, I found myself walking down the aisle and was married by the time I was 29. So I could check that off, my list that, okay, I'm married by the time I'm 30. And so, of course, because I was married, like it was, we were, even before we decided to get married, like I had in my head, like, it's time to have a kid. I'm going on 30. Like, it's time to have a kid. So that just became the mission. And, my son, beautiful Voss, came along, within a year of us getting married. So Voss came, I got married at 28. Voss came at 29, just before I turned 30. So again, I had officially, sort of accomplished these things, but I didn't feel accomplished. Like, of course, my son is my greatest accomplishment, but, I didn't feel the way I thought I would feel, but it was largely because I wasn't in the relationship that would foster what it was that I was looking for. And ultimately, before my son turned 1, I left that relationship, and, we'll leave it there and get into the rest of the details at another time. So here I am, starting sort of over again at, 31 with my son. And now it's like, shit, it's, one thing to try to figure out dating. It's another thing now to try to figure out dating with like, a toddler, like, and a young toddler. He wasn't even like 4 or 5. I didn't have any family in the area. So, and my network were like my friends and stuff like that, but I am definitely the woman, the mom, the friend that's like, I don't want to be a burden to other people. So I didn't know how I was going to figure this out. The marriage did not end amicably, so it wasn't something that I felt like I'd be able to jump into co-parenting with ease. I didn't feel like that was available. And so I was scared. I was just like, how am I going to put my life together again? So quick pause for reflection at this point. So, in my early 30s at this point, and what I learned about myself at that point was I definitely was looking for a relationship to complete me. Like I felt like, like many of us, codependent. I didn't realize I just knew, like, in all transparency, like, especially if I was in a relationship with somebody for a long time, like when I felt like it was coming to an end, especially if it wasn't an end that I wanted, if it was like the other person, or, we're getting to a place where we're just not getting along, but I feel like I can still fix it. Like in those spaces, I was codependent. I would like freak out, when it felt like a relationship would end, because I would worry immediately about how am I going to find somebody else? When am I going to be with somebody else? And having a total aha moment right now, I'm realizing every ending of every relationship was like a freak out fear factor that I wasn't going to achieve this goal. which is some of the stuff that I'm dealing with trying to have my second child, over the age of 40. I'm way past the goal that I set for myself as far as like the age for having the last child, right? I'm still trying to have my second child at that age. That was like my limit, and all of that. And a lot of the freaking out and anxiety I feel around not having conceived my second child is, that same thing, like, oh my God, like I've always wanted to do this. Like, what happens if I don't, accomplish that? And that's honestly something I'm still working through. And that's something I would go through at the end of my relationships at that stage in my life. Like I would freak out internally. I would freak out. I was definitely one of those people that had it together on paper, like graduate school degree, good job. I bought my condo at like 25, 26, like, you know what I mean? So on paper, I was doing all of the right things and all of that stuff, but just internally, what the fuck? Like, And so, so it became figuring out my life and learning to date as a single mom and how that would work. And, ultimately life did bring people my way. The first relationship I engaged in post-divorce was not a healthy relationship. And my perspective at the time is the first relationship when a woman comes out of her divorce is likely going to go one of two ways. She's either going to be like, I am woman, hear me roar. I will never be in a position to like get married, divorce, just kind of like really embracing like this very staunch like position, or going the other route of being like totally complacent and acquiescent because you don't want to fuck up the relationship because you just came out of a divorce, right? I always felt it was like one of two ways. And I went the submissive route with somebody that totally did not deserve that and totally took advantage of that and totally just kicked me around like spiritually and stuff like that. And so that, relationship eventually ran its course. Here I am again, finally getting to the place where I realize like, yeah, I need to take some time in between, these relationships. Like I'm starting to get to the place of like, yeah, this is me work. So interestingly enough, and I find every podcast I say something a lot. So the first one was the second podcast was the third podcast I probably just talked really fast. The fourth podcast I caught myself saying again a lot, and this one I think it's going to be the interestingly enough show. So interestingly enough, that relationship, that first relationship post-divorce, even though he, was not cool, and even though like he was the jerk, frankly, and how, he showed up and how things ended, it was the relationship that told me I am the common denominator. Like this guy is so different from the Muslim guy who's so different from like my ex-husband. So there's these, these different types of people that I've dated, but they all had in common dating me. And there were some things, that I've heard from each relationship that I was willing to embrace. And I'm always so, so grateful for that moment. It's like the moment that I knew Temple was for me. It was that same kind of feeling of like, I could have went into bitter mode. I could have went into like angry, I am shutting down my heart, screw men, all men are dogs mode. And what kind of path would that have put me on? Certainly not one that would have kept me, on the journey of like finding this love, that I was looking for, finding this like relationship that I was looking for. I'm so grateful that instead of blaming him, I was willing to look at myself and say, all right, some shit's got to be different. And it was in that space that I started therapy. I started talk therapy. I had tried talk therapy a few times before, but I always say like finding the right therapist is kind of like Goldilocks and like finding the right bed. Like you got to kind of sleep in, well, I don't want to say sleep in different beds, like, but you got to, because saying sleeping in different beds, in my head, it sounded like sleeping with different therapists. I'm not saying that, but you get what I mean. Like it's like trying out different therapists and finding the one that's a right fit, finding the one that's just right. And so I kind of was like in my Goldilocks mode before I found the therapist I had at the time. I want to say her name because I want to share her with the world, and I will, but I'm not ready to share her just yet. But if you are looking for a therapist, please let me know, and I'd be happy to share her offline. But she is so significant in so much of the beginning of my true journey of healing and coming home to myself that I just don't want to be like, hey, shout out to you. Like, she deserves like space on a podcast. And so I want to reserve that space for that. But I was connected with her, and she literally helped, Humpty Dumpty put herself back together again. And it was in that therapy journey where I understood how being interracial impacted me as a kid in terms of like being different from a lot of my friends, and how that turned me into people pleasing, just really beginning to scratch the surface of like, I'm not enough, scratching the surface of like playing myself down, just scratching the surface of a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff. And it was during my therapy journey where David, my love, came into my life. And again, I want to save our story for either our podcast together or for another podcast. But he came into my life in that therapy space. And so it was my first opportunity, my first experience of approaching a relationship from a more whole and healed perspective, although that's about 10 years ago at this point. I still was nowhere near being whole. Like it took like David and I having a really bad breakup for me to really start that process of truly becoming whole. But I was in a much more whole place than, say, when I dated, the Muslim guy, or when I, married my ex-husband. Like I was in a much more, not whole, aware. I was in a much more aware place. But soon enough, my stuff started kicking up. Just this, like, I want this life. And at that time, David was anything but ready to be anybody's husband, provider, stepdad, any of that. Like, and so that was a lot of push and pull, frankly, that we had at the beginning of our journey together. And so you get to that point where we had this really bad breakup, and that coincided with me getting into a really bad car accident, which is the story I think I told in the first episode. I got into it a little bit, but that car accident ultimately put me out of work for 2 months in terms of just healing. My body wasn't broken physically, but I think the doctor that examined me, because it wasn't my primary doctor that examined me post the car accident, I think he looked at me and could tell, like, your spirit is shot. And he was just like, yeah, I'm going to write you out of work for like 2 months. You need to just sit down. And it was in that space where I found yoga in a beautiful healing way, in a way that was different than I had ever understood yoga before. And then that was what ultimately led me to my teacher training journey. And that journey was huge in terms of me finding my way back to myself, because the yoga teacher journey is what kicked off Find Your Free, finding my free, and ultimately being a guide to help you find your free. So once I had that post breakup relationship with David and growing as a yoga teacher, I'm in therapy, we're getting to a point where I'm in therapy, say like, 5 or 6 years. But once yoga teaching became a thing, I was able to kind of do more of that and be more in that space and do therapy less. And so it's always a beautiful thing when you can shift from going like once a week, maybe twice a week, to like every other week, to once a month, to like, hey, I'm just going to do a quick check-in. And I was getting myself to that place, which was beautiful because I was growing, I was healing, I was becoming more whole. And once I got to 2015, again, at this point, at 2015, I'm like 5 or 6 years into 5 years into therapy at that point. That's when I decided to quit, my corporate job, to really step into this yoga teaching work, this spiritual work full time. And as I began to grow in the spiritual work, again, when I talk about where I was at 18 of like, hey, I just want to be married because that's all I know. Now, at 38, 30, I'm getting closer to 40 now. Be past my, goal of 30, I'm getting closer to 40. And I've had this life experience. I've had spiritual experiences that now I'm starting to understand, like, oh, like, yeah, some things are just luck in life and come your way, but you gotta get in the driver's seat, of your car. And I think I used that reference in the third episode. Like, you gotta get in the driver's seat of your life and make shit happen. Like, it's not just like, oh, I want to do this and it's going to happen. Like, no, you gotta make shit happen. You gotta pray, but you gotta do the work. You gotta find the connections. You gotta just go to the therapy. Like, it's not, like, you gotta make shit happen. And I'm finally starting to realize that. And in that space of realizing that, and just stepping into my purpose more fully, I finally became, I'm still actually getting there, but I finally began to feel that less sense of like this codependency and I have to be in a relationship and I have to, and it was just like, okay, I'm here, I'm raising my kid, and, I want to be with somebody. And I still had my anxieties about that, but it wasn't such like this definition thing anymore. You know what I mean? It was not that. And honestly, it was like in that space, where I'm really finally starting to come into my own, that David came back into my life. And as painful as some of the experiences, not the whole first part of our journey, but there were some painful experiences. And, as much as that, I got my ass kicked a little bit there, it was necessary because it literally kicked my ass onto the path of finding my way back to me. And I'm grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that. And ultimately David came back into my life at a time when he was ready to, work towards giving me the things that I wanted, and where I was in a more whole place to receive that and to be able to be in that relationship. So now you fast forward, we've been living together 2 years. This year will make 3 years. And, it's been the experience of learning to live together. So again, without getting into too many details, like I was married, but I didn't know anything about being a wife. Like, I was young. It was not a good situation. So I had the experience of being married, but I never really knew what it was like to create a home, with another person, because outside of that, I always lived on my own, became a single mom. And it was just like, I run the household, and I'm already a prideful woman. I come from strong women. So that's just, without even realizing it, like, I am building up, like, I want to be in relationship, but once I get into relationship, I built up this wall of like, I can do it myself, even though I wasn't like overtly like that. Like, there are definitely some women that are like, fuck you, I don't need you, excuse my language, but we're just there today. But I was not one of those, but I definitely had these moments. And I'm learning this, I've learned this in these first, 2 going on 3 years of us living together. And so, there is one thing I wanted to mention, so I'm going to get into that now. But again, without it being too much, because it's 43 minutes in. I told myself this was going to be a 30-minute podcast, and I refuse to let this be more than an hour. So, but in this space of learning each other, and anybody who's been in a relationship, who's been in a true of living together, certainly if you've been together a long time, like, there are moments where you're like, oh, can I do this? I mean, I had a moment of that in my yoga teacher training where I felt like I wanted to quit. And I always remember Dana, my love, my guru, shout out to you, telling me, like, if you didn't want to quit, I'd question if you were on the right path. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you should almost love something so much that it makes you want to quit because you want it that much, right? And so in that way, like, is when you're like, oh, because if it means something, it's going to challenge you. Like, that's just kind of part of the deal, right? Not in a way that it's like making your life uncomfortable, but challenging you in terms of growth. Challenge is not always a bad thing, right? But challenging you in terms of growth. And that's where it's like, I've been challenged. And so I hope he doesn't mind me telling this. I don't think he will. But so we seek out spiritual guidance, like, and so readings and things of that nature, and, getting to just get insight into our lives, our path, just kind of like what we're doing. And so we both kind of consulted, end of the year readings, and without putting too much of his stuff out there, without him being here. In his reading, it came up that like your mate's got some stuff, and it wasn't something that he expected. And, usually like when we get out of these readings, I'm more of the like, oh, I want to share everything. Again, he's Capricorn. So there's a lot of like, no, I'm going to keep it to the best. I want to process it myself. I kind of share, then process. Like he processes and then decide what he wants to share. But, we'll usually do like a quick, like, oh no, it was good. Or she told me this, or this resonated. So he, when he shared with me, like, yeah, some stuff came up about you, it shook me up. Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? Like, I came up like in this way that actually didn't feel very positive. It actually scared the shit out of me, frankly, like, because I went straight into like, oh my God, like this means he's going to leave me mode. Like, and we've been building this life and working things out, and my kids all invest, all these different things running through my mind. And it was like, fuck, he's going to leave now, like because of this reading. Right. And I know enough spiritually to know, like with these readings, it's not always about taking everything literally. It can be a warning. It can be insight. It can be, because these readings ultimately kind of tell you what it is based on the energy and experience of the moment. But ultimately we have free will, right? So it's like, I mean, obviously, if you get a reading and the result is something great, you're going to roll with it. But if it's like something comes up that makes you uncomfortable, the work is like, okay, is this my truth? Like, I need to leave this relationship. This is really not good. Or is it like, okay, maybe if I shift this and I shift that, you know what I mean? Like, that's what that's telling me. So it's not always as literal as it seems, but I'm one who processes things literally. David says that all the time, like, you're so literal. So I do. I process things literally. And so I took his reading and began to process it literally, and even hear myself saying that out loud at this point. It's like, it wasn't my reading to process ever in the first place. It really wasn't. But it freaked me out because I just wasn't expecting to come up, and to come up in a sort of not positive kind of way, if you would. But ultimately, as things began to die down, I looked back on the fact of us doing couples counseling. We started couples counseling over 2020, just to really be the best version of ourselves. But the things that were coming up, like in the couples counseling, like things that, were being shared that maybe couldn't be shared in one-on-one, or you didn't feel safe to share one-on-one, or it just was forced to come out in counseling, I started thinking about those things as far as what came up in his reading. And then I consulted my yoga teacher, Dana, to talk to her about it. Like, what the fuck? Like, I can't believe we would get 2 years in and build this foundation for it to just be over. And she was like, 'cause it's not about you. Like, that reading is about him, but it's not about you. Like, what you got to do is like focus on you. And, that conversation could be an hour in and of itself. But when she told me that, it started to click with my readings that I should have been processing, which across the board were telling me, you need to go deeper spiritually. You got some healing you need to do. Yes, we see this baby like in your future. And if you don't jive with readings, again, just leave this behind and enjoy the conversation. But like, yes, we see this, but you've got A, B, and C to do beforehand. And I would take that information and do A, but not B and C, or do B, but not A or C. You know what I mean? So like, but the message across the board was like, you've got to invest in you. And I guess because I had done all this work, the therapy, the yoga teacher training, like I know enough to know that healing is a constant. Like, we're always healing, we're always growing, we're always having opportunity to grow and shift and change and stuff like that. But I thought because I had sort of arrived at this place of like this full awareness of like, I have to be more whole, to have this relationship. Like, it's not a relationship that's going to complete me. Like, it's two wholes coming together to make a bigger whole. You know what I mean? It's not half of somebody and half of somebody coming together to create a whole, because like, what about each other's other half? You know what I mean? So I began to connect the dots and put together my own readings, my own guidance, and realize like, no, I still got some shit I've got to take care of within myself. I still have fear-based thoughts. I still have anxiety around expectations. I still have a lot of expectations. There's just a lot that it was like, no, it's time to really invest in me. All the spiritual practices, like I'm always encouraging for my students and my clients, it's like I really got to take time to pour into myself. And that is one of my main intentions for 2021. Frankly, I wrote stepping into my queendom. Like I know I'm a queen, but I need to move with that authority a whole lot more. And so as I really began to understand this and make what came up out of his reading about me and not about, oh my God, he's going to leave me, it actually made sense of what came up for him. You know what I mean? Because I couldn't be the long-term partner that he needs if I'm still not completely whole within myself, and vice versa. You know what I mean? And vice versa. So love the one you're with is when I started hearing that song in my head, it was like, that's the podcast, right? So 50 minutes in, I'm trying super hard not to go way over an hour. I'm going to be an hour at this point because I still have to share my passage. But, without having any real direction with how I was going to approach this podcast, I certainly hope now that we're at this point, 51 minutes in, that it makes sense. Just relationships are beautiful. Having a mate is a beautiful thing. Like, I don't knock that. I won't say, you know what I mean? Like, it's what I want. I still want, the kids that like the things that I want. There are things I still imagine those things, right? But it's not looking for another person to complete you. It's not even looking for your expectation to complete you, because as I've been really, learning and understanding in a more deep way, is like, yeah, even if I have this other baby right now, am I still, I'm whole, I'm healed, I'm deserving, but am I still where I need to be to have the child that I want to have? You know what I mean? To foster this little girl that I envision in my mind, And so now my work, these first 3 days into this new year, what I've been focusing on is just really trying to let go of all that I've been so attached to, because going back again to the beginning of this podcast, like, this is a life I've wanted for more than 20 years at this point. I mean, starting college at 17, 18 and saying, okay, I'm going to accomplish this life by 30. But way before that, as a little kid, I knew I was somebody who wanted kids. I just knew that. I just knew I always wanted to be a mom. And I am a mom. God bless. I'm so grateful. I am a mom. But I guess like being a mom of multiple kids, but I am a mom. And so even with that, like sitting in that more, like, just, yeah, I want more kids, but just be present with what I have. You know what I mean? Like, pour into who I am, focus on my spiritual work, focus on really applying the things that I've been guided to apply, as far as like doing a warm fast, which is what today's day one of, like a 6-day warm fast, like just having broths and teas and soups, but just as a way to ground myself, to cleanse myself. So, just taking more time with my meditation, just all these different things of giving myself like true self-care. And when you truly love the one you're with, you can better love the one you're with. So in other words, the one you're always with is yourself. You came into this world with yourself. You'll leave this world with yourself. Your whole life experience is with yourself. Other people come along. You have family, you have friends, you have kids, you have community. It's all a beautiful thing. But as 2020 showed us, like, if we could not engage with the world, like, who are you left with? You're left with yourself. And so it's so important to love the one you're with. You're always with yourself, so that when you are with another person, when you do have a relationship, whether it's a relationship that's on the way, whether it's a relationship that you're in and you're looking to hit your own reset button, like wherever you are on the relationship spectrum, The more you learn to love yourself, the more you can truly love this other person that you're with. I'm sure anybody listening to this podcast has heard this, ad nauseum in their lives. Like, you got to love yourself first to truly love others. You got to have compassion with yourself to truly love others. But, it's true, and sometimes you can hear this 10 times, but it's that 11th time. It's that right person. I've gotten advice on things my whole life. It might not sit until 5 years later because it comes from the source that it needs to come from. Like, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear type stuff, right? And so maybe it's just hearing it again in this in a way that's just hitting you different. Like, when you truly love yourself, when you truly pour into yourself, you fill your cup up, you fill your tank up, you fill yourself up, so that when you are giving to other people, you are not giving to them from an empty tank. And that definitely applies to friendships, to family, to working relationships, even on the entrepreneurial path. That applies, right? Like, in my path, in my work of self-care or being a spiritual guide for others, like, my work is in pouring into others. So it's totally critical that I pour into myself, and I'm not even doing that enough as far as my work. Like, I definitely have moments where I give so much more to my students and my community than I give to myself. And at some point that's going to burn out, So love the one you're with. You are enough. You are worth it. You are worthy. You are deserving. You are whole. You are still becoming whole. Like, love yourself. Love the one you're with. Pour into yourself. And that might just help to bring some ease to your loving relationship. If you're experiencing some bumps in the road and can't figure out why, and it's not like that it doesn't feel unhealthy. It's not that it's not somebody you don't want to be with. Like, but if there's just something that's just kind of off, you know what I mean? Like, are you expecting them to fulfill all your needs? Are you expecting them to pour into you in a way that you need to pour into yourself? And, it's just 3 days in. I've just been having this realization for like a week and a half. So, I'm still on the journey too. But the realization has calmed a lot of the anxiety that I was feeling, a lot of what kicked up when David did get his reading. Like, I totally went into an internal tailspin. And now I feel like all is well. All is well. Just keep doing the work of loving the one you're with. So I certainly hope that was of benefit. I hope that resonated. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to bring things to a close. Certainly I'm going to take a moment to read a passage. I have my Journey to the Heart book here with me. So wherever you are, find a tall spine, soft shoulders. Maybe close the eyes if that feels good, and take a deep breath in. And exhale out through your mouth. Doing that again, taking a deep breath in. Exhale out through the mouth. And as you continue to settle in with your breath here, this passage that I'm going to read is from January 1st. The first passage from Journey to the Heart, which is a 365-day book of daily reflections. So this passage, January 1st, called Honor the Beginning. Beginnings can be delicate or explosive. They can start almost invisibly or arrive with a big bang. Beginnings hold the promise of new lessons to be learned, new territory to be explored, and old lessons to be recalled, practiced, and appreciated. Beginnings hold ambiguity, promise, fear, and hope. Don't let the lessons, the experiences of the past, dampen your enthusiasm for beginnings. Just because it's been hard doesn't mean it will always be that difficult. Don't let the heartbreaks of the past cause you to become cynical, close you off to life's magic and promise. Open yourself wide to all that the universe has to say. Let yourself begin anew. Pack your bags. Choose carefully what you bring, because packing is an important ritual. Take along some humility and the lessons of the past. Toss in some curiosity and excitement about what you haven't yet learned. Say your goodbyes to those you're leaving behind. Don't worry who you will meet or where you will go. The way has been prepared. The people you are to meet will be expecting you. A new journey has begun. Let it be magical. Let it unfold. All parts of the journey are sacred and holy. Take time now to honor the beginning. So lovelies, the beginning, honoring the beginning, and just tying in with the theme of this episode. The beginning is you. It starts with you. It ends with you. The journey is you. So honor the beginning. Let this beginning of the new year be a space of internal reset if you haven't already thought about that or contemplate that. If you are looking for a relationship, have that on your vision board. Get specific about, what you're looking for. What does life look like for you waking up, with this person? Have those things on your vision board, but be open to the journey, right? Be open to the journey. So you don't get caught up in expectations and end up sort of making each relationship fit or be the thing that's going to complete your expectations, because 9 times out of 10, it ain't going to work. So honor the beginning and love the one you're with. So lovelies, I will end this podcast as I always do by saying, may you be happy. May you be free. May you be peaceful, easeful, useful, and joyful. The light in me honors the light in each of you. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you next week.